Welcome back to another episode of the Tim Boxeo Show. Now, this is your weekly disclaimer. We always start with a disclaimer, and that is because this is not your average boxing podcast. If you're looking for a discussion on Canelo and Caleb Plant, this is not the podcast for you. We focus more on like the cracks and the crevices of boxing. We're going to discuss all things club boxing. Now, that means good, bad, ugly, dangerous, funny, whatever, okay? If you want to hear about that kind of things, this is the place. Now, if you're looking for a conversation on Canelo and Caleb Plant, no problem, or anything, along those lines, there are plenty of podcasts out there for you to listen to. You should follow Tim on Twitter at TimBoxeo and ask him which podcast should I listen to, and he'll tell you. But if you're up for the world that Tim Boxeo is about to bring you into, the club world, strap in. Let me introduce the man of the hour, the TC Boxing Hall of Famer, the most reliable guy to post clips that are going to make you say, wow, that was brutal. Tim, how's it going?
Good, Angelo. How are you? We're recording on Tuesday night. It is kind of difficult because I guess by all standards, we're recording during what we would call a club boxing show. So live club boxing happening right now that I'm not watching from New York City. Can't do two things at once.
I have the stream on in the background, and so far, not necessarily anything that you'd be crazy to miss out on. But you being the fight junkie that you are, you may be going back and watching.
It was nice. They made it free on Fight TV. I always like when Fight TV sprinkles in the free broadcast here and there. So that was good.
I got to say, I've ordered one Fight TV pay-per-view, and the quality was pretty good. But like I'm looking at it, like I have the stream open like on the side on the monitor, and the quality of the stream is not that good. Is this usual?
It's hard a question to answer because they broadcast from so many different areas, but I would say with in the US, yeah, that's pretty unusual.
Maybe the connection is bad or something. I don't know. I don't know how to adjust it. I clicked the little gear and nothing. But yeah, the quality is kind of iffy, I would say, but who knows. Anyway, we have a great show planned for you guys here today, so let's start this off by getting to our story of the week.
Got a great story this week. Great story. And it's the comeback of heavyweight JD Chapman. And I got to thinking about your comment last week. I didn't mean to start off the show again with another heavyweight discussion. I'm actually a really big fan of the little guys. And you made a comment. We highlighted some of the little guys last week, but that's just a side note. We'll get more little guy action here going in the coming weeks. The comeback of heavyweight JD Chapman. If this almost comes up every week too. I wonder the age of the people that listen to the show in general, and I'm thinking there are some listeners of our show that have never heard of JD Chapman, and the reason is JD Chapman turned pro in 2002. And
a while ago,
that's almost 20 years. And in the first 3 years of his professional career, he built a record of 15-0 with 14 knockouts, mainly against debutantes and fighters with losing records, exclusively in Arkansas, not necessarily the boxing hotbed of the United States. The exception, he did have one bout in Wichita, but he was doing this basically due to a lack of amateur experience rather than going the amateur route. A lot of people in that time frame that wanted to become a boxer went into tough man competitions. Those were really popular at that time. So, if you weren't boxing since you were 10, 12 years old, wanted to turn pro, instead of getting some amateur fights, you'd go fight in tough man for a little bit. And one of my friends, Caleb Truax, that most listeners have probably heard of, that's how he got his start. A lot of people in the early 2000s did the same. So then Chapman, throughout his career, was primarily promoted out of Arkansas. Former heavyweight Stacy Goodman, fixture in the club boxing scene in the early 2000s. Chapman, though, did have some high-profile trainers, Jeff Mayweather, former heavyweight champ Michael Moore, and Chapman, once he hit that 15-0 mark after the first 3 years in his career, didn't really face a fighter with a losing record from that point forward, and finally landed on a tally of 29-0 with 26 knockouts that took him in his career to February of 2008. And if we're being honest and fair, if you look at the 29 victories on his box rec, it's pretty difficult to find a notable name. Although he did fight outside of Arkansas at the time in mid 2005, 6, 7, and 8, appropriate level broadcasts on the national level, like Showbox and things like Showbox and Ring City are now. He did headline those on a national level a few times. And at that time of February 2008, Chapman was ranked as a heavyweight in the top 10 of 3 of the 4 sanctioning bodies. And in the WBC, the 4th one, he was ranked number 14. So getting a lot of steam nationally. And in that time period of that February to the fall of 2008, there were 2 different lanes, 2 different stories that existed in the social sphere on the internet and were reported at the time.
So we're going to go into the rumors, right? This is the rumor part. What is the true story of J.D. Chapman? A man who I could best describe looks like if Braun Strowman debuted as a babyface. Whether you know what I'm talking about, Tim, or not, some people will, and they'll think that that is a good comment here when they look up the natural J.D. Chapman.
I feel like we both have the same reaction. Like we both have this very interesting reaction. So like
honestly, you said he competed in strongman, right?
Right, tough man, yeah.
Or yeah, well, he looks like the generic like guy you think of when somebody says, "Oh yeah, tough man competition."
Yeah, he does now. He does in his box rec now. He looked obviously like most of us. He looked very different in 2008.
Oh, speak for yourself.
The time period that we're talking now. Yeah, right, right. Okay, so there's 2 lanes of stories from 2008 as they were reported in the news. Mm-hmm. And this story, we're not going to go year by year from 2008 to this past weekend, but we'll get there here pretty quick.
If you want the full story, though, go to the Tim Boxeo Discord, which could be found in Tim's bio on Twitter on the link tree. But anyway, give us the rundown here.
Okay, so 2 different stories. The only thing that's clear in both stories is that an opportunity existed for J.D. Chapman to fight David Haye,
okay,
the Londoner.
Sure.
And Haye, you might remember, was the undisputed cruiserweight title holder, champion of the world.
It's not usually how you describe an undisputed champion is a title holder.
Yeah. I could. Hey,
unless you're picking your words very carefully here.
I caught the title holder right when it came out my mouth. Okay, so undisputed world champ. And Ion turned him pro, and he was going to face Vlad Klitschko, who was of course, reigning heavyweight champ at the time. And Haye wanted to fight a heavyweight in the current landscape that was similar to Vlad in his size and in punching power. Big, tall, strong guy to show that he could compete at that level. Now, Let's start with the UK's version. So, according to a 2008 piece in The Guardian, very popular journal in London, Haye's plans were thrown into disarray when J.D. Chapman failed to board his flight to London. And according to The Guardian, Haye's trainer at the time, which will be familiar to almost everyone, Adam Booth, had agreed to terms for the fight with Chapman, who was 25 at the time. Again, 29-0, 26 knockouts. But the day before the press briefing, according to Booth, Chapman did not board his plane to the UK. Booth said he received a phone call 10 minutes before the briefing, the press conference, from Chapman saying, and this is a quote from Booth, quoting Chapman, that the reason Chapman didn't get on the flight, in Chapman's words, are, "I'm not coming to England to get knocked out," Booth said. So,
Interesting.
That's one side of the story. Hay, at the time, of course, David Hay was quoted as saying that Chapman is the same size as Klitschko, and I want people to get a taste of what I can do to a big heavyweight. And like I said, there's always another side of the story. A day earlier, as is typically the case in boxing, right? A story with the opposite facts came out. This one from Boxing Scene. In this story, Chapman relayed that he never at any point agreed to terms to meet David Hay because the offer was first proposed at a, quote, ridiculously low purse of $100,000, which Chapman turned down. And then after turning that down, the offer was increased to $40,000. I have the story linked in the show notes from back in 2008 to Boxing Scene. It's kind of difficult to understand what is a quote in this story and what is the author of the story just providing his opinion. So I'm attributing some quotes to Chapman that you can only infer by reading the story are his quotes, which is what I just read to you. And then the author of the story quoted to Chapman what Booth said, that I'm not coming to England to get knocked out. And Chapman says this quote was an outright lie, but Chapman says he did say he never agreed to signing the deal with his former manager, Scott Hirsch, to, quote, be sent to England as an opponent for short money, even though I haven't fought since February, so about a 6-month layoff. So Chapman ultimately turned down the fight with David Hay because of concerns having to do with his conditioning, training, and having to take a fight of this type on less than 8 weeks' notice. Now, I would add to the story that I don't know if the date with the opponent that David Hay did move forward with was moved back. However, Hay did fight in November 15th, 2008 in the O2 in London against, of course, Monty Two Guns Barrett, winning by KO5. And the date of this story in Boxing Scene and November 15th would have been 8 weeks. Now, Chapman goes on, quoted as saying he is totally disgusted with the changes that have taken place with his own team. Hirsch moved on from being his manager, essentially became a promoter in that area, and a new manager was brought in. And the long-term plan that he and his long-standing manager had of not pushing for a promotional payday and instead, continuing to build wins and build towards a big payday was, more so a big opportunity than a big payday, was never really passed on to him, and changes that now, in Chapman's words, were really at the drop of a dime going to jump on a plane the next morning and head to London to fight David Hay. So, with the lack of his amateur career, he wanted to continue to build up and work towards a title shot. At one point, sources reported that Chapman was offered to fight a bout with Sam Peter for $600,000 that Hirsch turned down because it didn't fit that goal of continue to build towards eliminators and a true world title shot that they could prepare for appropriately. In conversations with friends, Boxing Scene went on to report that Chapman revealed that he had never even talked to Scott Hirsch in the 3 months prior to being told over the phone that on Monday, you're going to fight David Hay for $100,000 in November, and you've got to be on a plane at 5 a.m. tomorrow morning for a press conference in England. But the story concludes by saying that Chapman felt that in returning back to Arkansas, he was giving essentially an ultimatum regarding his career, that things would turn out tough for him if he didn't take this offer. So the story kind of ends there. Chapman stays pretty quiet, does not take a fight. And then 9 months later, a follow-up story comes out and is published in Boxing Scene, doing a follow-up with Chapman. A ton of ground is covered in this story, and I've got the links in the show notes if you'd like to hear more of the details. But essentially, from his manager at the time building towards that big fight, Scott Hirsch, by first taking an eliminator, which is what Chapman thought was happening instead of the Hay fight, and then more details about Hayes' fight being forced on him for short money and him having to be on a plane to 8 hours. And also him essentially, Chapman, that is, essentially questioning whether additional money was included in the deal, not that out of bounds in boxing for one promotional outfit to offer the other promotional outfit a certain sum, and then only a certain percentage of that sum being passed down to the fighter. Questioning whether there was side money involved for Hirsch. And then ultimately the story also mentions that Chapman's contract was sold out to Don King Promotions in September of 2008. So all this extensive background, if you weren't aware of it, is important, because if you didn't know where this story was heading or haven't looked it up yet on BoxRec, where this story ends in the fall of September 2008 is that J.D. Chapman retires and does not fight again, and essentially disappeared from the landscape, and at least in the boxing world, and wasn't heard of again. And that is until June 4th of 2021, just about, almost exactly 2 months ago. Chapman shocked almost everyone when he showed up to a weigh-in for an event the next day, June 5th, in Arkansas versus a former MMA fighter who was a 1-1 professional boxer, deep on an undercard in Springdale, Arkansas. Chapman weighed in at 295 pounds, about 50 pounds heavier than he was last seen in the ring in 2008. But, and I tweeted the weigh-in video out back in June, looked pretty fit for a 38-year-old guy who hadn't been in the ring since 2008, at least professionally. And not surprisingly, took a 4-round decision, won that fight, moved to 30-0 with 26 knockouts over that former MMA fighter named Tony Lopez, who is 47 years old. Now, around that event in June, here 2 months ago, Chapman did mention to the press that he'd been quietly training for a July ring return, 13 years since the David Haye fight fallout, fight fiasco. And when this fight on June 4th versus the MMA fighter was presented to him on 2 days' notice, he decided, what the hell? I'm training for a fight in July. I'll take it. Well, all this now brings us to Saturday in Fort Smith, Arkansas. I purchased a mixed combat sports pay-per-view from an independent promoter. We had some amateur Muay Thai on there, some pro Muay Thai.
Jousting.
Jousting, some pro and amateur MMA. Pretty interesting. I'd never seen amateur MMA and amateur Muay Thai. Pretty nothing really noteworthy, but nothing I'd watch again, that's for sure. And Chapman, now 30-0 with 26 knockouts, was the main event of this mixed combat sports event in Fort Smith, Arkansas, facing heavyweight journeyman Jamal Woods, 25-49-9 in a 4-round heavyweight bout. Now, in the press release for the show, both Chapman and his promoter had some interesting quotes. Asked whether or not it was too soon to fight such a dangerous opponent, and this is straight from the press release, the word dangerous, as Jamal Woods so early in his comeback. Chapman said, "Woods is tough," I quote, "and will be a good test for me, as I'm rusty and nowhere close where I used to be. However, if I can't go through guys like Woods, I might as well hang up my gloves and retire for good this time."
Oh,
and then
boy.
You know where this is headed, right, Angelo?
Yep.
So Chapman's promoter from Arkansas, Edward Mendy, might have the quote of the year here in this press release. J.D. Chapman is the next great American hope.
Oh, promoters named Eddie and putting their foot in their mouth.
Oh, wow. That's a backhanded slap. No offense to Deontay Wilder and Andy Ruiz, but no American heavyweight today has a better shot at the world title than Chapman, period. JD has the size, the power, the skills, and the experience to take on any top 5 heavyweight today. I'm so pleased with his progress. I would gladly put him up against any other top 10 heavyweight today. But first, he must pass the Wood test.
What is the Wood test?
Jamal Wood.
Oh, okay, just making sure.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great line. Well, in that test Saturday, Chapman looked every bit 38 years old and out of the ring in 13 years. Looked slow, out of shape, rusty. Jamal Woods has been in the ring with a lot of professional names that you've heard of, with almost 70 plus pro fights, but hasn't beat anyone of note. And he was not in good shape either, but in better shape than one or two other times that I'd seen him. Not much really happened in the first round of this fight, but then in the second round, Woods just started to hurt Chapman, really putting pressure on him. And late in the second round, looked to me like Woods had Chapman out on his feet, really staggered. In the third, Woods almost knocked Chapman clear out of the ropes, or out of the ring itself. Only the ropes held Chapman up. And the referee did a nice job correctly crediting the knockdown and giving Chapman a standing 8 count. The fourth round, I thought Woods was going to just flat out knock Chapman out. But both guys were so exhausted in the fourth round, really nothing happened of note until about the last 30 seconds. And Woods really put it on Chapman again, right to the final bell. The scores are read, and Jamal Woods takes a 38-37 times 3 victory, unanimous decision 4 over J.D. Chapman. So all 3 judges had the fight a draw, and Woods needed that knockdown point to get the W, which is pretty ridiculous because I think at best you could given a 10-10 round in the first round. That'd have been my only justification for scoring a 10-10. So little happened in the first round.
That might trigger
other than
some
that,
people.
no, that was definitely would trigger me. But essentially, Woods won everything else. So now it'll be interesting to see if, in fact, J.D. Chapman will ride off into the sunset. It's crazy. His Facebook page on Sunday just merely mentions that he says he has to get vaccinated after having COVID twice, which is a really weird thing to say after you're 30-0 and 26 knockouts and just lost your first pro bout. But maybe he's got other plans in mind.
Gee, I'm curious why he hadn't been vaccinated. You think after you got it once, you're like, that probably wasn't that cool. Let me ask you this. Did you know all this information before the fight?
Yeah, I knew the story of J.D. Chapman. It fit kind of in the wheelhouse of what I would watch back at that time.
The reason why I ask is because I feel like if you knew this story, that fight must have been like, assuming that it didn't look like one of the amateur fights we're seeing in the Olympics with all the like holding and I don't know what we call it, but if it was a decent enough fight, I imagine this might have had you on the edge of your seat when you're like, wow, JD may actually lose this and not get a chance to show that he'd beat one of the top 5 heavyweights in the world.
Yeah, it did. So I was tweeting almost round. Yeah, well, yeah, it was a 4-round fight. I was tweeting round by round. I mean, this was like,
must not have been a lot of tweets then.
Well, no, you know what I mean? Like, I was tweeting it as if it was my Wilder Fury 3. And to your point, though, it wasn't getting much juice on my tweets. Like, I'd have 1 or 2 likes on, hey, we're going to the 4th round and J.D. Chapman is going to lose this fight. Crickets are going off of my timeline. So, yeah, I mean, it was shocking to me that things took the turn they did in the second round. And so, I mean, some of the little details of this brought back my memory when I started researching it for the show. But I just remember him being offered the fight with David Haye. I didn't really remember some of the nitty gritty details from the story that I just shared with you. But yeah.
All right. Well,
so there you have it.
That makes for a good story of the week. But were there any fights that were actually like barn burners or something really interesting happened in the fight?
There were. there's a handful of them, and I want to share them without going too far in the weeds again in one singular fight. There was an interesting fight on the undercard of Fight Zone UK, which we've talked about a bunch of times on the show, on Saturday in Hamilton, Scotland. Mexico City's Jar Conejo, which translates to the rabbit in Spanish, Gonzalez, pretty unheralded Mexico City fighter, improves to 10-2-2, taking a majority decision 10 victory over Scotsman Billy Stewart, 10-1, giving Stewart his first defeat. And with the win, Gonzalez becomes the IBF Youth Super Bantamweight champion. Really good fight. Really big step up for the 23-year-old Scotsman Stewart, who had been inactive since November of 2019 when he took a 6-round points decision loss over one of my favorite fighters, friend of the show, Brett Fido, Brett the Threat. And I actually messaged back and forth with Brett yesterday about Stewart. And Brett said, with proper camp, he'd sure love a chance to fight Stewart again and really thinks he could beat him. The bout before the Fido fight, Stewart fought a 4-rounder versus a fighter who was 0-44, which kind of gives you an idea of what kind of step up this was for him to fight Gonzalez, who really hadn't been anything noteworthy, but really put the pressure on Stewart throughout the fight, beat him up, swolled up both of his eyes, cut him over both eyes. It was just really, really aggressive throughout this whole fight. And on the road, I was a little surprised because the fight, to be fair, was pretty close. I think a majority decision win for either fighter would have been fair. But I did think that Gonzalez did enough to take the decision. So credit to the judges in Scotland giving the fight to a Mexico City fighter when the undefeated Scot was on the A side in the red corner. Close circuit to Angelo.
Yeah, that's an inside joke.
So really good fight. Further proof that Fight Zone UK putting out some good products. So I wanted to share that with everyone. And then Angelo, I've got some other stuff to run through. Just stop me here or jump in as you'd like. And we had a really fun night of fights on Friday from Boston Boxing Promotions. Talked about them a number of times, and of course had Pete on the show a couple episodes ago. They'll be back at it for their 3rd show in a row this coming Friday, live and free on YouTube. We'll talk about that in a minute. Angelo, shout out to your Patreon. If you're not in the Sunday Boxing by Sunday Puncher Boxing Patreon, $1 will get you in. And a number of your members who are really knowledgeable, really, really hardcore boxing fans on the main scene, I think came out and admitted they enjoyed some really good entertainment from Boston Boxing. And I agree. It was club boxing, but there was a lot of entertaining stuff on the show. Overall, I think it was a lot of fun. Light middleweight Kyle Cusick moves to 3-1. Shout out to Kyle Cusick. TKO 3 over Paulo de Souza. That was a really fun bout.
Wasn't he hurt?
Unless
I'm misremembering this, I didn't know their records. I didn't know who was who usually, but I thought that in that fight early on, de Souza was like gonna win, and then when he loses and they show that like, oh, he's 0-22 now, I'm like, oh, okay, he seems a little more talented than 0-22 says.
He does. I just don't think he has the gas tank and to get through 4 rounds. But yeah, Kyle got clipped there, but to his credit, righted himself and cleared his head and took care of business and got him out, de Souza out in the 3rd round. I agree. De Souza did not look like an 0-22 fighter. I just don't think he's got the gas tank to fight 4 rounds consecutively. But it still made for a hell of an entertaining fight, that one. And then our guy, Robert, and I've given him the name War Bricks. I know it's pretty generic, but he needs to have a nickname. We're going War. Falls to 0-7, which I think is ridiculous because debutant Ryan Clark moves to 1-0, TKO 1. And no offense to Mr. Clark, but I do think it was a quick hook on our guy, Robert Bricks. I think Robert was covering up nicely and should have been given the chance to continue. But Ryan Clark takes the TKO 1 victory when he stops Robert War Bricks in the first round. And then in the main event.
Oh,
I'm sorry?
Yeah, no, you
Go
can
ahead.
go through the main event.
Okay. I'll just add quick. Main event 23-year-old light middleweight Evan Young Holyfield moves to 7-0 with 5 KOs, 4 knockdowns in the second round. I couldn't believe what I was watching. 4 knockdowns in the second round. And after the fourth, the ref gave a full count and let the fighter go to his corner as the bell rang. Unbelievable. Anyway, Holyfield starts off the third, knocking his opponent, Augustin Cicero, down, who falls to 16, 19, and 3, and gets the TKO 3 victory. And that was the Boston Boxing Show. Good stuff.
There were some pretty brutal knockouts on this, or I guess you should say stoppages. Boxrec Gray, who's been on the podcast, was doing commentary. He had I think the commentary was entertaining enough. I really liked the guy who left commentary. He was like, I got a long drive, so he just checked out early. That had me laughing out loud. The crowd was pretty funny because the crowd is really close to the ring, or at least it looks like that on TV. And so like just watching the crowd, and it looks like there was standing room as well as chairs, and watching people just like interacting and responding. Like there was one moment where like I saw somebody just visibly unhappy with the knockout, like in the way that they're like, oh my God, I didn't know I signed up for this kind of violence.
Yep.
I was entertained by that. But yeah, overall, I thought this was pretty fun.
Boxer Gray, and I have the link in the show notes to a big knockout. Boxer Gray had a great call on the big knockout as he was on the mic, and the knockout was really good. Boxer Gray's call was really good, and to your point, the fans that you see in the background when the knockout happens that look like they're right jumping up and down on the ring apron almost. It just made for a really cool scene. And, that's why I mentioned many shows ago that's what drew me to Boston boxing is just the rowdy crowd, good knockouts, entertaining fights, just a good entertainment.
Something
so
we'll have to. Well, I think Peter listens every now and then, so maybe he'll tweet at you. The one thing I'm curious about is how come fighters come from different directions? Like some walked in from the left, some walked in for the right. Do they do like a heels are on one side, faces are on the other side sort of thing? I'm curious about that.
I thought in that show they all came from, now my memory's escaping me. I can't remember what I did about 30 minutes ago, but I think they all came from the same area of the ballroom, and then maybe the traffic, police wasn't that good in directing them from one corner to another. Is what I think was going on.
I will agree that Robert Bricks got stopped maybe a little too early. But I'm not gonna argue that he shouldn't have been stopped because he definitely did look like he got rocked. But maybe you just let him see a little more like, all right, yeah, you're actually rocked.
What do you think of the nickname?
Robert War Bricks?
Yeah.
I mean, he doesn't need a nickname. His name is Robert Bricks. His name isn't like Robert Wilson.
So you're gonna trying too hard?
I just don't think he needs a nickname.
Or he should have a nickname that
like his nickname should be like Robert Bob Bricks. And then you can go Bob Bricks, right. Bobby Bricks. There you go. Bobby Bricks.
All right. I overthought that one.
I would buy Bobby Bricks' debut R&B album, by the way. Because that sounds like, if your name is Bobby Bricks, it sounds like your album's going to be fire.
Well, shout out to Robert Bricks, because on the next show, we're going to get that W. And Peter, closed circuit to Peter Simbor. Can we get a match made for Bricks where we get the W on the record? Come on. Let's get it.
Peter is going to joke with you, or he's going to bust your balls a little and be like, yeah, why don't you step in there with him?
Yeah, Bricks would knock me out cold. There is no doubt about it. I wouldn't make it past the first round regardless. So,
Stamina?
Yeah, stamina. I'd be swinging for the fences. He'd have at least that going against him. I don't know what my punching power is like, but all right. Anyway, hey, I got one more to mention. There were 3 title bouts, and I just want to mention one more. fight, but there were 3 title bouts atop the card at Big Punch Arena on Saturday, all American Boxing Federation titles, the ABF. And one of them was 17-year-old Oregonian Miklo Arnold, proves the 4-1-1, takes a split decision 8 victory over a really tough and awkward Edgar Daniel Almeida, falls to 10-26-1. Records deceiving. Almeida is a really difficult fighter to face, just really awkward, really challenging guy to get in there with. And Arnold takes the ABF Americas West super featherweight title by scores of 77-75 times 2. And then Almeida got 77-75 in his favor. But the one I wanted to mention with a little more detail is a female fight, actually, and it was an excellent fight. 18-year-old Dana Ponce Tuzita Bolanos moves to 6-0, unanimous decision 8 victory over Miriam Rosales, who falls to 8-4-1. And the 18-year-old Ponce Tuzita takes the ABF Continental Americas Super Bantamweight title. This is a very aggressive, very tough, all-action female fighter. She just comes forward and lets her hands go. Pretty decent boxer. Don't think about, 1995 to 2005 female boxing. It's not like that. With Tuzita, she is a good little boxer and really just wants action, wants to get hit and be hit. And for Big Punch, that's exactly what we want. And sad but notable sideline or parallel to the story of Dana Tuzita Ponce is that she was fighting for the first time here Saturday since her last bout, of course, which was May 22nd, when she defeated Sarah Arenas Alba by TKO 3 in a city just south of Mexico City. And tragically, Alba died days after the bout due to damage to the head inflicted in just their 3-round bout. Miss Alba had been feeling poorly after the fight. She walked out of the ring under her own power and actually went home that evening and was home for a couple of days. All the information that's available on this is scant, and it's all in Spanish. So the stuff that is out there isn't terribly detailed, but a couple of days after the fight, she admitted herself to the hospital, and doctors immediately put her into a coma and intubated her in an effort to keep her alive due to swelling on the brain. But sadly, she passed away on May 30th at the age of 30. And unfortunately, the young lady, Miss Alba, sadly leaves behind 3 young children. And that fight, May 22nd, was Ponce's last fight prior to this ABF Continental Americas title bout that she won on Saturday at Big Punch, which she was very emotional in the ring after she won it, and rightly so. She fought a hell of a fight, and credit to her for going out and fighting a tough, aggressive fight. She was cut a couple of times, battled through that, and I'm sure that was not easy to do after what happened to her in her previous bout. So shout out to Tuzita Ponce for her victory at Big Punch on Saturday.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. And it's kind of crazy when you think about, like, women's fights are generally 2-minute rounds. The fight only went 3 rounds. What was the punishment like that would have her feel, or well, have such drastic negative physical effects on her?
Yeah, it wasn't a 12-round knock him down, drag him out, 3-minute per round bout, right?
Which is what we typically associate with that type of of a morbid result where,
yeah.
I mean, Maxim Dadashev went 10 rounds and, it was brutal, but that was the distance. And what we believe, I guess you could say what the prevailing notion about this is that it is the prolonged, physical damage that you inflict on the head, which leads to these sort of things. But this can Also, but I mean, this just goes to show that no, it's not. It could happen pretty quickly as well.
Yep, absolutely. Sadly, sad but true.
Okay. There's no real good way to transition out of that topic, guys. So we'll just transition the way we normally do and say, was there anybody, in terms of a bright spot this week where you think, all right, well, maybe you're ready for the next level beyond club boxing?
There's one, and a lot of the hardcore boxing fans that I interact with on social media have brought this guy up before over the last year. It's a Ukrainian who now resides in Germany, a super middleweight named Petro Ivanov. He's 25 years old. He improves to 14-0-2 with 9 knockouts. He overwhelms someone named Rafael Ortiz, falls to 14-4-1 with a TKO 3. A really brutal left hook to the liver. It was the main event on a show that was broadcast on a German streaming site from Baden, Germany. And Ivanov has got 2 draws on his ledger, but this guy really looks the part. I mean, a brutal puncher, really good boxer, really has a lot of skill. I don't know if there's a whole lot more to say about him other than he hasn't really taken that next step. He's kind of, in his last 5 or so fights, has kind of been hovering at the same level of this opponent, Rafael Ortiz. Like kind of 14-5. Look at his box rec over his last 5 fights. 19-3. 5 fights ago, 12-0. He's kind of just in that lane right now, and it's about that time where we see him on a really high-level German card, Ukraine card, where he has a major step up for, WBC International, Intercontinental, beyond those belts that he's been taking home. This one was for the WBC International Super Middleweight title. So, an eliminator or a real title shot, he's kind of right there and ready. I don't know what else you do with him other than step him up now to that spot. So Peter Ivanov, one to watch.
I'm wondering when Germany's gonna get the scene back going. It seems like since the Klitschko's kind of, I guess you could say, left Germany, when he fought Brian Jennings, and then further losing to Anthony Joshua, it just feels like the German scene has disappeared. Like, who's the top dog in Germany right now that's holding up that scene? Is it Feigenboots? That's a
Felix
serious
Sturm
question.
is back.
Oh,
Angelo.
Right. I said holding up the scene, not a bank.
Wow.
That was a good one. That was a good one. And I think he also went to prison for tax evasion, just for the record.
Yeah. That was you were a couple levels below the joke there. That was good. I like that one.
Tim is trying to say that I should be on commentary. I was like, I don't know. These aren't nice things, I don't Gray is great because he's just a nice guy. He doesn't say anything mean, but occasionally I say these things and I'm like, oh yeah, I shouldn't have said that.
Well, I did have a mentor once tell me it's much easier to take things back than to never have said what you want to say. So just go ahead and speak your mind, Angelo. You can always apologize later.
Really?
You're doing it right.
Really? You think so? I have some things you should try out on your wife. Cause
what the hell does that mean?
No, things to say. You tell me if you can take this one back.
Okay. All right. Yeah, good. Well, no, that's a whole different lane.
My experience in relationships is there are things that you can't get put back in the tube.
Yeah, that's a whole different lane. That doesn't apply to the advice I just gave. As someone who's been married 24 years,
yeah,
that does not apply here. Yeah.
See, I was trying to see. I knew you were married for a long time, so I wanted to see with all your experience if you believe that was actually true. But apparently, there are different standards in different situations. Is what you're trying to tell me?
Yeah, exactly.
Nah, so I mean, I don't. The point there is that Gray's good on commentary. I don't think I would be. I think I'd be better than Jim Lampley at least.
I don't disagree.
Anyway, now my favorite part of the podcast. you have to tell me which guys we got in action this week that are notable for their duration that they have been active professionals.
Yep. And side note for this conversation is we'll be off no show next week. So I looked ahead 2 weeks, and while there could have been one or two that I mentioned this week upcoming, shout out to Sharif Bogheri, there were two. Sharif Bogheri fighting in Mexico this Saturday.
Oh, really? That's one of those like, wow, he's still active?
Yeah, and only 32.
Another guy that feels like he's been around forever, though.
Forever. Yep. And hasn't fought in over 2 years. Been really active, though.
Has he ever been in a fight that you like recall as being good?
No, they're all ugly, right?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember, unless like if I'm remembering correctly, but I remember as just having that really rough and ugly style that isn't particularly entertaining to watch.
No one I'd tune into, but none I would tune into. But those weren't he wasn't the two that I wanted to mention, because 2 weeks from now in Russia, in the main event, we've got a Russian heavyweight, someone named Vitaly Kudakov. I've actually never heard of, 4-0, fighting Sherman the Tank Williams, who is 48. And the last Sherman Williams, and amazingly, Sherman Williams has been active through this whole time, frighteningly. And the last Sherman Williams fight I watched on purpose was the 2011 pay-per-view versus Evander Holyfield on Integrated Sports pay-per-view, which might go down in history as the worst pay-per-view I've ever purchased.
You didn't purchase Mosley Mora?
Oh, God, this was worse than that.
That was a joke.
I did, and this was worse than that. And Sherman Williams was washed in 2011. No disrespect, sir, but it's been a long time. But that might not even be the most shocking one on the card, because a super middleweight Russian by the name of Rakhman, oh good grief, Akhmetkanov, 2-0, is in a 10-round super middleweight bout, at least according to BoxRec, and I couldn't verify this, versus someone named Ricardo Mayorga, who also is 48 years old. And I guess amazingly enough, never retired. I guess I missed that part.
Okay, that is like the least surprising thing that you've said so far.
Really?
That Ricardo Mayorga never officially retired? I understand if there's like a long period of inactivity, but I can't imagine Mayorga is one of those dudes that's going to say like, yeah, I've officially retired from fighting.
Okay, well, that's fair. I mean, I think on the very first episode we ever did, we talked about a Nicaraguan prospect ready to take another step under like a showbox level named Lester Martinez.
Yeah, I remember.
And he's 9-0 with 9 knockouts now. And in his pro debut, he slapped Mayorga around in 2019. I guess I had forgotten about that. I thought it'd been like 5-6 years, I guess was my point, since Mayorga
2019
fought.
was 2 years ago.
I know. Very surprising.
It's not like that would be recent memory for you. Like, boxing moves fast. There's a lot of cards every week. If you're like, I completely would understand why you didn't remember that.
I see. Yeah, it does feel like forever ago. That's a good point.
But you often talk to promoters. I'm like incredulous at this. Are you sure that both Ricardo Mayorga and Sherman Williams are on the same card?
I'm sure, 100% positive, Williams is on the card, because yesterday the promoter sent out the main fight poster, the Russian promoter, with Williams on it. And we're touting the big fight versus, what is the way to say the fighter from the Bahamas is the only way I could say it without butchering the Bahamian. How do you say, what is it? Bahamian?
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 I'm just curious because, like, okay, you got this. It's a card in Russia, right?
Right.
Okay, remember the card where Mickey Rourke knocked that guy out?
Yes.
And I put knocked out in quotation marks for those of you wondering. Don't you remember that on that same card, Ruslan Provodnikov fought Jose Luis Castillo?
Oh yeah.
Well over I think it was like well over a decade after the last fight that anybody had ever thought that Castillo was in that was like relevant.
Sure.
So I wonder if they just got a gimmick going over there.
It wouldn't be above what we've seen on Russian shows just in 2021 alone.
It's like when those small wrestling companies like have in like 2021, their headliner is like the Honky Tonk Man.
Fair.
All right.
You always lose me with the wrestling comparisons because that's not my lane.
Yeah, but you have to know that one.
I know the Honky Tonk Man.
That one is perfect for you.
Yeah.
The Braun Strowman one, I understand, but Honky Tonk Man, you got to know. Anyway,
see, I'm more like Roddy Piper those days. That's how far back my wrestling goes. And then there's a big gap.
Are there any notable journeymen who are going to be in the ring this weekend? Usually the answer is always yes, because they fight so frequently.
Let me just mention 3 really quick. Shout out to Brett Fido fighting Saturday. And Brett will be in action on the same card Saturday from the UK with Ricky Slick Rick Leach. 353-1, only 6 by knockout. And the guy we spoke of on the show 2 weeks ago that didn't end up fighting is fighting this Saturday on the same card of the UK. And I will be tuning in specifically for his fight. 41-year-old middleweight Kevin McCauley, 15 wins, 209 losses, only 14 by knockout, and 12 draws, fighting someone named Tommy Jacobs, who's only 1-0. I don't know anything about Mr. Jacobs, but his nickname is Sweet Tea, and Sweet Tea better know his way around the ring, or he's going to get an L. So I'm pulling for Kevin McCauley in this one. No offense to Sweet Tea.
And any other shows you are particularly looking out for this week?
So I mentioned just a little bit earlier in our recap that Boston Boxing Promotions is going again live Friday on YouTube. It'll be one of the shows that I prioritize. Always prioritize.
It's also sold
Pretty
out.
Nice. Also sold out.
I mean, I don't know. Actually, I just threw that out there. The other ones were, so I have to assume that this one is too.
I've had a busy couple of days, so I haven't really paid close attention. But usually Pete puts that out. I'm sure we could find out. You can find out if you look up on his look up on social media. But a pretty nice main event. Brandon Berry, welterweight, 22-5, against Travis Castellan, 16-4. NABA, which is a long-standing belt.
Oh,
USA.
Yeah, this is their title fight that they're doing.
Yep. It should be a good fight. 10-rounder. Should be good.
Yeah. Peter talked about this when he was on, about the third card, because they were doing the consecutive cards. The third one was going to be a title fight.
Mm-hmm. Yep. The main event in last week's show was a good main event too. Really fun fight. And if you're listening to the show but put off to some degree by how, and I'm not specifically talking about Boston Boxing, just Pete, closed circuit to Pete, just to make it clear, I'm not specifically talking about Boston Boxing right now, but just if you're turned off a little bit by how low club boxing can go at sometimes, this main event will not be that. So this will be a really good fight. And so if you haven't tuned into a live, club show, tune in for this main event. You'll see some good boxing. It'll be a rowdy crowd. I think you'll like that fight. And I think this was also the show he was talking about because there's a female on the fight named Amanda Pavano, depending on where you're at. I guess it's Pavan. She's 8-0, and she's in a four-rounder with 3 minutes per round. And I think is a pretty big ticket seller. I think Pete mentioned this show, like he could have sold out the whole show with just Amanda and the main event and not added any other fights. But I think we've got, 10 fights on the show. And Ray Oliveira Jr., 8-3 on the card too. So I'm looking forward to this one. Should be fun.
I think one other thing that these club shows have, well, I don't know about all of them, But at least what I saw from the Boston boxing one, and you say that big punch is like this too, where the pace is really fast. So like it could be a drag sometimes when you turn on a show and then like you get like a second round knockout, and then because of time constraints of like, oh, we got to air this card in Lithuania, and their feed only goes live at the top of the hour, so they stall for a bunch of time. That doesn't happen in these shows. So like as soon as the fight ends, they're like telling these people like, all right, get out of the ring, and then the other dudes, here they come running into the ring like ready to get their fight going. So that's one of the things. Is like it's kind of wild. Where it's like, wow, an hour passed and I've already seen 6 fights.
Yeah. It goes really fast. Last week's show did have a lot of knockouts early on in the show, and I actually don't think the fights were, really uncompetitive or anything. They just ended in quick knockouts, and the show just really moved along. And I was thinking to myself, gosh, this whole show could be over in 2 hours, 11 fights. Yeah.
I was like, wow, they have like 11 fights on the card, and they're like maybe going to get to 2 hours.
I know. Yeah. But to your point, it's good just to keep it moving it along. And it's really, it makes for an enjoyable viewing experience.
It's like watching an NFL game, and like you don't watch any of the commercials. And like very few replays. It's like, oh, the game was only 11 minutes.
Does the NFL does this, I think, on the app, right? Where you could watch your team show on Monday, or team fight.
They don't fight in the NFL usually.
Not very well.
Although there was last year the guy who punched the other guy with the full on helmet on.
Oh my God!
It was great.
You could watch the game without.
That was probably going to be on your club KO of the month.
What point was I even making? It doesn't even matter anymore.
Oh, right. You were talking about the condensed game, because I was going to make the point the game. That, and I don't know if this is true, but like somebody said that like, oh, they calculated the time in which the whistle started and the whistle like called the play dead, and like there was like a total average amount of like 13 minutes of in-game time in an NFL game.
In the whole game?
Yeah.
I think it'd be closer to like 40 minutes. That seems really short.
Well, because think about it. The clock moves like while you're not playing.
Oh, you mean like actual...
Like they hike the ball to the whistle.
I thought those games... Well, okay, you know what? I guess it doesn't matter. We're slowly seeping into some of those other mainstream podcasts that talk more about other things than boxing during their podcast, but
I feel like you're taking a shot at me right here.
Not yours. You guys talk about boxing wall to wall, don't you?
I mean, usually.
Yeah, I think so. All right. Anyway, all right.
So Boston boxing on Friday.
To be continued. Yeah, Boston boxing on Friday. I'm just gonna go rapid fire on some other stuff because we don't need to go much deeper on it. But also Friday, pretty interesting. If you're a fan of the young prospects, we have one from Mexico. Friday, 17-year-old super featherweight prospect Zaid Rajon Colorado. He goes by Zaid Rajon Colorado. 8-0 with 6 knockouts, only 17 years old, as I mentioned. And he's been, and it'll be available online, he's been in an interesting fight 2 fights ago against a young prospect who is 5-0. And this one on Friday will be against another young prospect similar to him. It's like 21 years old and 5-0. And he's one to watch. Really good fighter, tons of power. And his fights don't show up on BoxRec for whatever reason until weeks after. It won't be listed on BoxRec now when you click on the show note link. And they're fighting in the Yucatan, Mexico. So we have that. And then also Friday from the Ivory Coast, as I mentioned on last week's show, the Royal Boxing Organization African title will be on the line. And this show is going off on the Ivory Coast. It will be broadcast live and stream will be available. So stay tuned to my Twitter timeline for that one. I won't miss it.
Just want to say Friday, on that subject that
Uh-huh.
I got a message with
Uh-oh.
somebody feeling like I took a shot at Poland because you were mentioning some like small countries around the world, and I had thrown Poland out as an example, and I thought that was completely unfair to me because I thought I misunderstood what you were talking about. I thought we were just naming uh like smaller countries that ain't the big players, but you were talking about like the really really small ones like Ivory Coast or
Right.
um whatever other countries. And I was like, listen, I just wasn't paying that close attention and wasn't completely like understanding the conversation.
I love it.
But by the way, Poland isn't that big of a country. Like, you could understand my mistake there.
No, it's a fair mistake, I think. And, you know, shout out to every single listener of the podcast. Like, one point that we absolutely have to make clear, I think, over and over on the show, which we haven't done in a while, is that, yeah, we have fun and laugh about some of this stuff, but I don't have enough time in my life to consume all these things that I don't like and just want to make fun of. Like, I love this stuff. Otherwise, we wouldn't be talking about it. I don't, I'm not a masochist, sitting around and watching stuff I hate and then getting on a podcast to talk about it. So any laughs we do have are certainly not at the expense of a specific fighter, country, or promotion.
Well, the thing
Unless
is,
the ring's on fire. Unless the ring's on.
What you actually like when I talk to Tim, just pulling the curtain back a little bit, and like the things that Tim doesn't like are the things that like well, when I say we, I mean like me. I'm like, oh yeah, I was watching the prelims, the Fox prelims, and Tim's just like, I don't know. Tim just has that middle ground where that's the stuff that he's not into. It's like, oh yeah, Fox prelim, ESPN prelim, no thanks. That's the only part where I think you're like, no, I don't like them.
No, not unless the showcase stuff. I don't care for. Like if it's a a young prospect coming up on the PBC that or on DAZN for that matter, that's really, when I say young, I mean like 18, 19, 20, 21. I'm not into the 25-year-old 15-0 showcase bout that's going to go 8 rounds.
Like a Devin Haney.
I can't stomach. Yeah, I can't.
I mean, I think he's
the belt.
A little bit past that, but like maybe 2 fights ago, Devin Haney.
Yeah, right. Exactly. I can't do that. I'll watch something else.
But Devin Haney turning pro in Mexico, Tim is there for it.
I know, it's weird, right? I recognize at least that it's weird. Shout out to me. All right, so Friday, Egypt, live on YouTube. There's a heavyweight main event. I'm tuning in for that.
Hold on, it's Egypt?
And this one it's Egypt's made the show a bunch of times. Ring was on fire.
Yes.
We had the TKO one where the bell rang in the first round, and the fighter's like, I'm not going to do this. So maybe something good will come out of Egypt Friday.
Yeah, Egypt's on a roll here.
Yeah, it could be great.
Well,
I think the next one will surprise you, Angelo. Friday, because I am all about 22-year-old Irish welterweight Paddy, the real deal Donovan, 6-0, 4 knockouts.
And this is on the Friday ESPN Plus show.
Correct.
Paddy Donovan, really? What about him?
He's a killer, man. He is.
Well,
he's this guy. Well, the way he approaches his fights in the ring are what I'm all about for a 22-year-old who's 6-0 and fighting on a deep undercard. He's not playing with his food. He's going to go in there and freaking get his guy out of there. And that's exactly what I want to see when I tune in on the deep undercard. And so I've just kind of marked him down as someone that I'm going to tune in to watch when his name shows up on BoxRec. So
all right,
that's how I'm going to spend my time.
I hate to do this, but I have to go back to the Egypt card because I was just curious. So I clicked on it, and I just needed you guys to know where this fight was taking place. This fight's taking place at Mandi Restaurant opposite Hacienda Whitegate 2 on the north coast of Egypt. That is what's listed on BoxRec. The Mandy
I've
restaurant
got,
opposite Hacienda Whitegate too.
it's not that out of the ordinary. I've got a
To
couple
have
of
the
friends.
directions in the name.
Yes. So I have a couple of friends. Now, I don't mean any disrespect by this, but my mind, the things are kind of melding in my head right now. So I don't know. I'm not trying to lump together Tanzania and Ghana because I actually think the boxing viewing experience and the fighters are very different from both countries. But it's kind of crisscrossing in my head at the moment. But I do have a couple of friends from Ghana, Muhammad Ariti, who I think is a really, really solid prospect. We've mentioned him on the show way back when. And then my friend Kofi, who actually runs KBox TV, who does all the broadcasts from Ghana. Well, we'll have both those guys on the show here at some point. But there's been times in the Ghana shows where, and I'm pretty sure it's Ghana, where they list it kind of the same way. Where obviously Bukum Boxing Arena is a legendary arena in Ghana, but I've seen shows listed in Ghana the same way. Like, it's down the street from, across the street from North parking lot. Just come to the main area, and I've seen that type of thing on posters in Ghana, and so yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing. Did you Google what the Mandy restaurant opposite Hacienda Whitegate looks like?
No, but I guess I should, huh?
Yeah, we need to know at this point.
It's on Yelp.
Egypt is, pretty developed, obviously.
Oh wait, no, this is in Hawthorne, which is like
This is in
25, 30 minutes
California
away
somewhere?
from me. Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, I don't know. It's weird because if you search it,
Ooh.
there
Oh,
are a couple of restaurants that pop up. One of which is in California, by fairly close to me. But then the next thing, okay, this is definitely the one in Egypt.
I see it. Wow.
But also what pops up is BoxRec.
Huh. I'll be damned.
So
This
I'm not sure what to think here.
this is literally right on the ocean, if Google is correct. And it is beautiful. Oh my God.
Now Tim's like, I could go to Big Punch, or I could go to what appears to be Paradise.
Yeah. It looks like paradise. Well, actually, where my brain was going is I could stop spending $500 a month on club boxing pay-per-views and put that in a shoebox and take my wife to Hacienda across the street from Mandy restaurant instead. But anyway. Okay, so let's move on. Saturday, we have an event in Pakistan that I've had on my radar for about 2 months now, because there's a heavyweight main event that I absolutely have to see that's only scheduled for 4 rounds. And this will be either live streamed or will be uploaded to the Pakistan Boxing Council YouTube page after it's done. So I'll be tuning into that. I already mentioned Angelo Saturday on Fight Zone UK, which I can't recommend highly enough, from York Hall in London. Good to see shows actually being in York Hall again instead of, bubbles in a car park. And that's where some of my road warriors that I truly love will be back in action. And it's got a nice 50-50 main event atop of the card. Dan Morley, 6-0, versus Louis Isaacs, 6-0, in a 10-round welterweight bout. Should be really, really good main event. And you get to see some legends, and it's only €4.99 a month. Fight Zone UK, can't recommend it enough. The sad thing, of course, is coronavirus is spiking almost everywhere in the world. So I don't know how long we'll be actually in York Hall, Bethel Green, before we might be back out in a bubble in the car park again. But another story for another day, I guess. And it's just crazy. Another crazy week, man. I mean, I feel like we've been on 3 weeks in a row now where it's just really kind of thin. I guess this is the dog days of summer. We talked before, like it's summer's usually pretty dead. And we did have that one weekend where it was crazy busy, but it's kind of thinning out again, I guess, maybe before the fall run. before boxing goes. And then we'll hear all about how boxing doesn't want to go up against football, American football here in the U.S. And so I don't know. I don't know what's happening right now.
Well, we don't usually venture into this land, but I'm going to bring something at least from the podcast that I normally, or I've done for the past few years into this one. And that is that what percent of this do you think is due to the fact that the pandemic happened and a lot of these smaller promoters who were putting on club shows or a lot of the venues that were hosting these types of fights are just no longer available and they didn't survive through the pandemic, and so now financially they're just not able to put on these shows. And this potentially is a reason for seeing a decline in the amount of activity we're seeing on the club level.
It's fair, man. I mean, I've talked to, become friends with a handful of club promoters all over the country and all over the world that I speak to almost regularly. And the consistent vibe all around the world is just how brutal it is to get opponents for this level of show. And I'm sure it's really hard all the way up to the top. I think that's probably pretty consistent everywhere.
Yeah, and like what we're shout out to guys like Boston Boxing and Peter specifically. Well, I don't know. There's probably other people involved, but he came on the podcast, so he's going to get all the credit. But like, Boston Boxing was able to. We also sound like Boston Boxing shills. I just want to point that out there. But
we do.
They were able to survive through the pandemic, and they were able to put shows on through the pandemic. And what I assume that means is that they may have been a little light in the pockets. They may have had to pay out and put these shows on, but they're also seeing the benefit of they put on these shows during the pandemic and maybe they didn't make any money from them. Maybe they lost money from these shows, but now coming out of the pandemic, they are stronger for it and they are thriving now. It looks like. And everything that I heard from, or I seen from the show, from talking to Peter, and then I talked to Gray about, it seems like these shows are actual hits in the New Hampshire area. I don't know what you call that area. Maybe it's New England or something. Yeah. But I think a major thing probably is that we're just seeing right now that the people who are putting on shows are the ones who are able to survive through the pandemic. And maybe guys who were promoting in the past have decided that the route to take is they had to get a job to pay the bills during the pandemic, which probably was tough as well because many places, the unemployment rate went up tremendously during the pandemic. But then also, you mentioned the fighters. Fighters probably said, hey, I can't get work fighting because there's no fights happening, so I may as well go do something else. And now maybe we're seeing like a shortage of fighters right now as a result of the pandemic.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. I am amassing some different lists of fighters for my Patreon that I like to tune into, from fighters that like Patty Donovan that I just mentioned that really bring the heat, or road warriors of the ilk of Brett Fido, who we love to shout out on the show, or Naeem Ali, who I love. And I've run across guys that have been really, really active, like Jamie Quinn or Brett Fido or Naeem Ali. And I mean, fighting every month, every other month, up until the pandemic, that then haven't fought since the pandemic. And, 30 to 35 years old guys. And that's the same kind of thoughts crossed my mind. Maybe they just thought, you know what? I've been doing this for 20 years. There's got to be a better way. And just called it a career. I'm sure that's happened for many fighters out there after, whatever post-pandemic means now.
Yeah, it's kind of sad how there was, I assume that even though in the short term there are plenty of people who were doing shows before that maybe aren't doing them right now, but we'll see as things open up. Well, we'll see, because like this Delta variant is out here whooping on people. But at some point, people are going to figure out how to, make some money off of these promotions and get this going again. And like the Boston boxing thing is a really good example of like, yeah, there's a market for this out there.
Yeah, absolutely, man.
So, all right, well, that wraps it up for this week. We definitely appreciate you guys listening. If you haven't already, you should go to twitter.com or just open up your Twitter app, follow Tim Boxeo. Check out the link tree, which is in his bio, where you get access to a bunch of links, and that will take you to a link to the Discord, which you could chat in there. It's a lot of fun. Boxer at Gray came into the chat and was kind of giving us like info off of the Boston boxing show that he did. So, some of the stuff that maybe he saw, some of the things that people were saying to him, or just his own observations of the show. That's the kind of discussion that you have in there. Then, Tim, what is going on the Patreon?
Yeah, some great stuff on the Patreon. If you haven't checked it out, go to patreon.com/Tim Boxeo. And for a mere $4, I'm building what I would call the kind of a social media scroll or a fightnews.com like scroll of specifically just club boxing, odds and ends, things that are noteworthy in club boxing, things that I can't or don't want to share in social media, and things that I could just continue to build upon that I'm not going to wake up tomorrow morning and Twitter has shut down my account. And so you can join and participate in the discussion there. I'm also releasing Patreon exclusive podcasts right now at a clip of once a week. I won't be releasing one next week, but once a week with deep dives on some of these subscription channels. I've got already fighters, managers, promoters lined up to join me for about 30-minute discussions on club level boxing, stuff that won't be on the main feed, and then working on a bigger idea on a once a month live viewing party / commentary where we're going to just flat out take over the club boxing world. And you can only get that in Patreon. So there you go.
All right. And if you haven't, you should rate and review the podcast. Give it 5 stars. All right. It helps out. Share the podcast if you like it. Otherwise, we will be back next week with another episode. Thanks for listening.